So what is a clause? So a clause is a group of words that has a subject and a verb. That's what a clause is. Phrases are a group of words with no subject and no verb. So here in chapter 3, we learned that a phrase is a small group of words, related words, without both a subject and a verb. And then back in chapter 2, we talked about sentences and learned that sentences contain both subjects and verbs. So what is a clause? A clause is a group of related words with both a subject and a verb. You might ask, well, isn't that a sentence? Sometimes. Some clauses are complete sentences, but others are not. There are two main types of clauses: dependent clauses, otherwise known as subordinate clauses. In other words, that's not a complete sentence, not a complete thought, it's a sentence fragment. And independent clauses, otherwise known as sentences. So independent clauses are complete sentences. They are complete thoughts. So you always want to write independent clauses and complete sentences. You don't want to write dependent clauses by themselves because that becomes a sentence fragment and you would lose points. So an independent clause can stand on its own. In other words, it is a sentence. One independent clause equals one simple sentence. It has a subject and a verb, and it may also have objects and phrases. And so an independent clause may have more than one subject or more than one verb. Here are two examples of two different independent clauses. One is a very short independent clause, and the other is a very long independent clause. So she spoke, subject, verb. So that's an independent clause, and that is a simple sentence. She spoke loudly to the class, trying to be heard over the noise. That's a long, simple sentence. So here are some examples of independent clauses. Complete sentences. I want a cheeseburger. So this is a declarative sentence. It is an independent clause. Do you want some? That is an interrogative sentence. So and then here, because I am hungry. That is not a complete sentence. That is a dependent clause because you have a subordinating conjunction because. Anytime that you start a sentence with a subordinating clause, which is what we're going to cover over here, then it becomes a dependent clause. So this is not a complete sentence because it's not a complete thought. That's how you can tell that something is a dependent or independent clause, because if it's not a complete thought, then it is not an independent clause. She stood and stared at me. That is an independent clause because it is a complete thought. Sit. You would think that's not a complete sentence, but that is an imperative sentence. The you sit, the you is understood. So whenever you give somebody an order, sit down, shut up, clean up your room, something like that, that's an imperative sentence, and you're giving someone a command, and that's also a simple sentence, and it's also an independent clause. Although he wouldn't tell me what he wanted, okay, that's not a complete sentence. That is a dependent clause because the word although is a subordinating conjunction. And whenever you start a sentence with a subordinating conjunction, you have a dependent clause. A dependent clause is always not a complete thought, and it is a sentence fragment. Is your homework done? And so here you have an interrogative sentence. Went home and ate dinner. Okay, that is like totally dependent clause because who went home? Who ate dinner? It's like you're missing your subject. So that is a sentence fragment. And so here you have subordinate clauses. So remember, you have two kinds of clauses. Independent clauses, which are complete thoughts, and then dependent clauses or subordinate clauses, which are not complete thoughts. So a subordinate clause has both a subject and a verb, yet it cannot stand alone as a sentence. Here are some examples of subordinate clauses. Because I am working late, it's not a complete thought, so it is a dependent clause. After we come home from vacation, Also not a complete thought, because it starts with a subordinating conjunction after, whenever, which, and who are all subordinating conjunctions. And whenever you start a sentence with a subordinating conjunction, then it's a dependent clause. So it's not complete. So notice that in the first three examples, you would take the first word away and you would have a sentence. So that means if I take away because, or after, whenever, which, or who, if I simply say I am working late, then you have an independent clause. As soon as you add in the word because, which is a subordinating conjunction, then suddenly it will become a dependent clause. So a dependent clause always starts with a subordinating conjunction. So now let's add some words to those subordinating conjunctions to make them complete sentences. So if I simply say, because I am working late, that is not a complete sentence. So how do we make that a complete sentence? We have to add an independent clause to that dependent clause in order to make it a complete sentence. Because I am working late, I will make dinner. So you have a dependent clause and an independent clause. Together, it's called a complex sentence. We will unpack and after we come home from vacation. So because I am working late, so if the dependent clause is at the beginning of the sentence, you have a comma. And if the dependent clause is at the end of the sentence, no comma. So we will unpack is the independent clause. After we come home from vacation is the dependent clause. So here the dependent clause comes after the independent clause, so no comma. But when your dependent clause come at the beginning of the sentence, you have to have a comma. Whenever we go to the movies, you want to sit in the back row. So you always have to have a independent clause to complete the dependent clause to complete the thought. I love Blue Jasmine, which is the last movie I saw. Jim, who is my best friend, just moved to Oregon. I don't know whom you are talking to. So look at the words we added to each subordinate clause to make it a sentence. What did we add? Yes, we added an independent clause to each one. You could string together 100 subordinate clauses, and you would still not get a complete sentence because every sentence must contain at least one independent clauses. So there are a few different kinds of subordinate clauses. And so you have some subordinate clauses that act like adjectives, some like adverbs, and so that's what we're going to talk about, and some like nouns. So you have noun clauses, adjective clauses, and adverb clauses. So I'm going to go over all of that in a second. So there are different kinds of dependent clauses. Who is visiting from China? Although it isn't dinner yet, until the game starts, which I bought yesterday. All of these are dependent clauses, and you need to match them up with a some kind of independent clause in order for it to become a complete sentence. And so here, so the first kind of dependent clause is an adjective clause. One type of subordinate or dependent clause is an adjective clause. Here are a few things about adjective clauses. Adjective clauses function as adjectives in a sentence, modifying a noun or pronoun. Adjective clauses are always in the middle or at the end of the sentence. They do not begin sentences. Sometimes adjective clauses are essential to the meaning of the sentence and are not set within commas. But sometimes there are additional information, and in that case are enclosed in commas. And so in other grammar books, this is known as restrictive adjective clauses or non-restrictive adjective clauses. And so adjective clauses begin with who, whom, whose, which, and that. Here are some sentences containing adjective clauses. This is my neighbor who owns 6 dogs. And therefore, this whole clause, who owns 6 dogs, modifies the word neighbor. My boss, whom I really respect. So whom I really respect is an adjective clause that modifies boss. This is the book that I read last week. And that I read last week is the adjective clause that modifies book. Notice that the second example sets off the clause with commas. This means that the clause is non-essential and could be left off, left out without losing the meaning of the sentence. We don't need that clause to identify the boss. It is more of a by the way. In the third example, the clause identifies which book you are talking about. This is the book. Might not be very clear without it. Sometimes it is difficult to determine whether or not a clause is essential to the meaning of the sentence. It might depend on the context. Sometimes it helps to read the sentence out loud. If you tend to pause before and after the clause, it might need a comma. So in the first example above, the clause might be essential. It might not be. You might need to go by the context for this one. So it's all up to you. So one thing about essential versus non-essential clauses, if your clause is not essential and you are using commas around it, use which for things and who for people. If your clause is essential and you are not using commas, set it off with that. However, if your essential clause describes a person, who or whom, it is acceptable to use that. I always tell my students the difference between who and that is that who is for formal English. So if you're going to write a research paper and you want to talk about people, you use who. If you're going to write a conversational paper, if you're going to write something for your friends and for your family, and it's going to be informal, then you can use that. That you can use for both people and things. So I want the dress that has the blue buttons. This is the more informal. This is more informal, so therefore you don't need to put a comma, and you usually don't, and it's like conversational English. I want this dress, which is less expensive than the other one. So since you are saying this dress, we know which dress you are talking about, so the clause is added information. So if the clause is added information, you put a comma. If the clause is not added information, you don't need a comma. Mary, who is my first cousin, is graduating college this year. So who is my first cousin is added information and is not really needed for the sentence. But when you have in a positive, actually this is an adjective clause. Notice that if I take away the who and the is, Mary, my first cousin, is graduating from college. Notice that becomes in a positive. And then if I add in who is, then it becomes an adjective clause. That's what I was saying in the previous chapter. The girl that is sitting in the front row is my cousin. So it is okay to use that if it's conversational English. But if you're going to write formal English for your research paper, use who. For instance, if you're going to write your job application, your cover letter, or you're writing your research paper for your teacher, I would use who. If you're writing an email to your best friend, your mother, or something like that, you could use that. That's the difference between that and who. Adverb clauses. Adverb clauses are clauses that function as an adverb, modifying a verb. So adverb clauses function as adverbs, usually modifying a verb. So here are some examples. So adverb clauses can be at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end of a sentence. When an adverb clause begins a sentence, they are followed by a comma. When the adverb clause is at the end of the sentence, there are no commas. And then also adverb clauses are dependent clauses that always begin with a subordinating conjunction. So some common subordinating conjunctions include because, although, if, since, until, whenever, wherever, before, after. Here are some examples of sentences with adverb clauses. Because I got home late, comma, I missed the TV program. Although I got paid today, comma, I spent all the money. If I finish my work early enough, comma, I can go with you. If I finish my work early enough, I just did that one. It has been a week since I returned from my vacation. I won't be home until I finish the speaking tour. Whenever I work late, comma, I end up staying up too late. I will follow you wherever you go. before I pay for the trip, I need to check my calendar. I will pay for the trip after I check my calendar. Notice two things about the examples above. First, when the clause comes at the beginning of a sentence, we have used a comma. So whenever the dependent clause is at the beginning of a sentence, we use a comma. However, when the adjective clause is at the end of the sentence, we don't use a comma. All of these sentences can be flipped around and the clauses put in the opposite place. And if you say the sentences out loud, if you say the sentences out loud, you will probably pause where the commas are and not pause in the sentences where there are no commas. So let's try it. We can flip them around. I missed the TV program because I got home late. I spent all my money, although I got paid yesterday. I can go with you if I finish my work early enough. Since I returned from my vacation, it has been a week. Until I finish the speaking tour, I won't be home. I end up staying up late whenever I work late. Wherever you go, I will follow you. I need to check my calendar before I pay for the trip. So when this dependent clause is at the end of the sentence and I flip the sentence over, I don't stop. I just say I need to check my calendar before I pay for the trip. However, if I flip it around and I put the dependent clause at the beginning of the sentence, then I'm going to pause. I will say, before I pay for the trip, I need to check my calendar. So that's one way. Read your paper out loud so that you can remember where you're going to put your commas. The second thing to notice is that some of the subordinate conjunctions are often other parts of speech. As we said before, a word can function as more than one part of speech, but only one part of speech at a time, depending on its use in the sentence. Until, since, before, and after can also be prepositions. If they are followed by an article and a noun or a pronoun, they are prepositions. If they are followed by subject and a verb, they are subordinating conjunctions that introduce an adverb clause. Notice the difference. After I check my calendar, clause. After school, prepositional phrase. Before I pay for the game, clause. Before the game, prepositional phrase. Until I finish the speaking tour, clause. Until last night, prepositional phrase. Since I returned from my vacation, clause. Since last night, prepositional phrase. So if these words are followed by a subject and a verb, it's an adverb clause. And if these prepositions are followed simply by a noun or a pronoun, it's a prepositional phrase. So identifying adverb clauses. I was late for the meeting because I was in a traffic jam. And so here you have each of the following sentences contains an adverb phrase, adverb clause. It may also have adjective clauses. Identify only the adverb clauses. I was late for the meeting because I was in a traffic jam. So because I was in a traffic jam is an adverb clause because it tells you when something happened. It goes back to late, so that's an adverb clause. If my sister, who is coming to visit, wants to go, I will go too. Who is coming to visit is not an adverb clause. It's an adjective clause because it modifies sister. I haven't heard from him since he moved away. So this is an adjective clause because it modifies him. Wherever I go, my cat follows me. Or my cat follows me wherever I go. So that's an adverb clause because it talks about where you're going to go. I am going hiking, although it is raining. So although it is raining, it talks about the weather, so therefore it's an adverb clause. It modifies the verb. Noun clauses, like nouns, function as subjects or objects in a sentence. Here is an example where the noun clause is the subject of the sentence. Whoever comes to the party will get a gift. The clause is the subject and will get is the verb. Note that you can substitute a noun or pronoun for that clause and it will still make sense. Joe will get a gift. Note also that the clause itself has a subject and a verb, as all clauses do. The subject is whoever, and the verb is comes. However, the clause as a whole is the subject. Okay, so basically they're saying whoever comes to the party, this whole thing is the subject of the sentence. And this is a clause that's used as a noun because it's used as a subject. Whenever you use something as a subject or an object, then it's being used as a noun. So that's a noun, and this is known as a noun clause. Here's an example of the noun clause used as an object. I know who you are. And so who you are is a noun clause that's an object. So remember, objects always come after the verb, sort of like I know Stephen. And so here, the who you are is being used as a noun, as an object. And always objects come after the verb. And here you have an example of a noun clause used as the object of a preposition. I gave the books to whoever wanted them. And so to is the object of the preposition. So here you have a clause that's used as an object of a preposition. So that's why this is known as a noun clause, because a noun clause can be used as subjects or objects of a preposition. And that's it for clauses, So that's it for this. Identify each of the following as an independent or a subordinate clause. If I told him a story, okay, that is a subordinate clause. Mary tells my little brother a story every night, independent clause. Whoever you are, that's a subordinate clause. Because it's Friday, a subordinate clause. I have been studying since yesterday, independent clause because it's a complete thought. Remember, when you have a subordinate clause, not a complete thought, independent clause is a complete thought. So each of the following sentences has either an adverb or an adjective clause. So tell me which one it is. So identify the clause. Whenever I am with him, I have fun. And so here, whenever I am with him is a dependent clause, and it is an adverb clause because you're talking about fun. I don't know who the girl who is walking in front of us. Who is walking in front of us is a dependent clause, adjective clause, because it modifies the girl. The story that I am telling you is a secret. So that I am telling you is a dependent clause that modifies the story, therefore it is an adjective clause. I didn't go because I had a game that day. And so here, this is an adverb clause. Identify the noun clause in each sentence and tell me whether it is a subject or an object. I don't know who you are. So this is a noun clause used as an object. Whoever is making that noise should stop. This is a noun clause used as a subject. I am going with whoever wants to go. And this is a noun clause used as the object of a preposition. Okay, so that's pretty much it. And then if you have any questions, feel free to email me. Feel free to email me anytime.